Welcome, everybody, to the best game dev podcast on the planet, the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today, we're talking with Matthew Kulewicz about the impact of great sound and dialogue in games.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Welcome, everybody, to our live Magical Game Dev podcast. On this show, we give devs the chance to hear stories of breaking in from real industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy, and joining me today is Matthew Kulewicz, who is a sound engineer and dialogue designer currently contributing at Dodge College. We're going to be talking about a couple of things here today, but the biggest thing is the impact of great sound and dialogue in games, an absolute huge double-part area of expertise. Welcome to the show, Matt. I'm really excited to have you here. What are you having for lunch?
Thank you, and good morning for all of us in LA, and I'm having the Breakfast of Champions coffee.
Indeed. I think that is, at some point, maybe we'll do some data polling. We'll have some cool charts that show how people answer this question, and it will show that 90% of the time people just refer to caffeine of one form or another.
Absolutely.
It is my blood at this point in time. Last time I went to the hospital, they just hooked up an IV bag of brown fluid rather than any type of blood. My blood type is coffee. Well, welcome to the show, Matt. We actually, so Matt reached out to us and said, hey, you don't have enough audio folks on this podcast. And that is how we connected and why he is now on the show. It's wonderful to have you here, Matt. As always, though, our very first question has to be the origin story. So tell us, Matt, where are you today and how did you get there?
So today, that's a good question. Today, I am a freelancer contractor in games out here in LA. I've been out in LA in about over 4 years now, just at the 4-year mark. But currently, I'm actually a full-time professor at Chapman University in the film school at Dodge College. And while I have that as my base gig, I still freelance contract for numerous studios in town, your Sonys, your Formosas, your, if you know anything about the studios, especially voiceover, dialogue in games, all the studios out here, I do a lot of remote recording and editorial. But my origins is before games, I was in film and TV and animation in New York. And during the dark times of 2020, I way before that went to grad school at NYU for music technology and was working at recording studios, but getting to games, was living in New York, was working in film and television out there, and during 2020 I was working on the Cartoon President with Stephen Colbert, and we did an entire season remotely. And so I started to become friends with voice actors because everyone was, how do we record remotely? We don't know what we're doing. And so I kind of became the go-to engineer for a lot of agents, actors, and friends of friends and actor friends of friends to help people be able to work. And that connected me with a lot of West Coast people. Through that, I ended up working on Space Jam 2. So if you listen to any Looney Tunes character in that film, I recorded them. Because I ended up becoming the go-to engineer for that. And through that, I moved out to LA. My wife and I were like, hey, we're all remote. We've always wanted to leave New York. Where do we go? LA is the natural place to go, for my career at least. And then moving out here, I was very lucky that the script coordinator for Space Jam says, hey, I got a gig that it's not your normal thing, but I don't know if you'd be interested. I need a note taker. It's the show called, it's the first of its kind. It's called Arcane. Would you be interested? I was like, okay, never heard of it. Sure. Is that League of Legends? I've heard of League of Legends. Ended up working on Arcane for both seasons. And through those connections, ended up working with voice directors and actors in studios and started exclusively, besides Arcane, working on games. And so here we are 4 years into LA, and now I'm pretty much all games, and except for a select few indie films and things like that. And then also teaching sound and sound design at the film school in Chapman University.
Living the dream. I'm not an audio person, and I still feel so much jealousy and respect for being able to work on Arcane as well as these other projects. Space Jam 2, what a wild title. Really cool, though. That must be, it must have just been tremendously exciting. One, of course, I think on a lot of bigger projects that wind up doing well, you can kind of sense that they're going to do well. But it must have been just tremendously exciting when season 1 of Arcane dropped, and you were like, oh, sweet.
Especially because I don't know League of Legends lore. So like I came in and they had already started production on season 2, and the core Riot team was so like we have to finish season 1 that, I was not, me and a few of the writers were kind of left to like, so we're still doing season 2, right? And so it was seeing the big fanfare of season 1, like, oh my god, this is wow, this is a thing.
You did the raccoon rubbing of the hands, like yes. Amazing.
Excellent.
It is like absolutely. It's such a joy to like one of the best things about working in games, and in this case film, but still games adjacent, is that moment when players, or in your case viewers, get to the content for the first time and you start to see their feedback and responses. It's just such a joy, regardless of whether you're indie or AAA or wherever in between, and regardless of how many players you have. Just having even one person sitting down and going like, "Man, I had such a good time," has got to be the best reason to do what we do.
Oh, absolutely. And like, regardless whether it's games or animation or anything, to be like, oh, it's that thing? I'm okay. It's like, no. Trust me, please. Like, I'm vouching for it. Please check it out. Because I've had that for many games too, where it's just like, what are you doing in this game? I'm okay. And I was like, no, you trust me. You just put an hour in, you're going to be hooked.
Believe us. Yeah, awesome. Well, how cool. So we said for the topic of today that we would talk about the impact of great sound and dialogue in games. What we love to do on this show is we start with sort of the 101 from your perspective. So give us that 101. We're in your classroom now. We're eager students. We're sitting in the very front row. What is your 101 on the impact of great sound and dialogue in games?
So I kind of have it broken down into like a couple mantras that I like to use. Like these are very mantras that some old professors of mine have given me, and I've kind of adopted. I would say with Sound 101, the biggest thing I always say is that the best sound design will always go unnoticed. In that you want something to be believable, right? You want to believe this world exists. I always say that before 1979, if I go, we'd be like, do you have emphysema? Are you okay? What's wrong? And now post 1979, you go, that's Darth Vader. Right? So you made it believable, and you weren't thinking about how did they make that sound. Like me, an audiophile, will think that, but you're not, listening to it going, I don't know. You're just like, whoa, that's crazy awesome, and I believe it, and I want to watch more of it. And same with, in any sound design, is that you want to believe that it's real, and when you believe it's real, you're not thinking about, how it's made. You're just living in that moment. It's when you are the illusion of belief is broken, and that's when you're like, oh, something's wrong here. Especially like in dialogue, if it's bad, whether it's bad casting, whether it's bad recording, bad implementation, bad editor, you notice it. No one watches a film or plays a video game and goes, wow, that ADR, that was really good ADR. You're not supposed to know it's ADR, So that is kind of my big one, is that in sound design as a global, the best sound design goes unnoticed.
Amazing. That's a really interesting one. There's of course a gigantic, games and art in general, gigantic plethora of what the correct approach is for any given game, any given piece of art. There are some games where you truly want to give a sense of realism. You want the world to feel normal, to feel well explained. But there's also more surrealist art and games that are a little bit more like, we want the player to be kind of uncomfortable. We want it to all be a little bit unbelievable. So do you feel like your rule applies on both ends of that spectrum, or do you kind of modify it given the project?
I think it still applies because, the way you approach the world with game sound, film and TV and animation is linear. You just play and it's start to finish. Mm-hmm. But with games, it's non-linear, and you're interactive, and the player has the choice of when certain sounds are triggered. Excuse me. So you think of I was thinking about this, you think of you're in a medieval world and you're unsheathing your sword, right? Do you want the sword to sound like you're in a cave? Well, what if you go into a small tavern and you still unsheath the sword and it still has this giant echo reverb? It's like, that's not believable. But you want to make sure it's clean enough to be able to manipulate, so that you, even in, a pixelated thing, you believe that pixelated unsheathing of a sword in a tavern is real and believable in the world of your character.
Yes, right. Interesting. Okay, so I feel like it's less about not noticing the sound effect and more about not noticing maybe the work that goes into the sound effect. It fits the world to such a degree that you're not thinking about that sound effect. It just is. It's there. Yep. Mm-hmm. That
Yeah, I
pixelated
think that's a great way
sword
to put it.
sound.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool, interesting. It doesn't. It fits the world. It fits the universe. Beautiful. Okay. What else? Do you have any other? Actually, here, let me take this approach. So most of the people in this room are not audio designers, and that's because this is an interdisciplinary community. So a bunch of people are doing engineering, or doing design, or doing narrative, whatever the heck they might be into. But that means, and this is such a big problem in the indie sphere, which is who we support best, that a lot of the times when we non-audio folks work with audio folks, we just kind of say, hey, can we have cool sound? And then we get cool sound and we implement it. And that's basically as much as we're really capable of contributing to that sound effect. We ask for some specific sound. Hey, can we have a cool sword draw? And then really it's kind of entirely on the audio person's desk to hit this golden rule that you're talking about. So what are some of your tips perhaps for those who are not audio for co-working with an audio person to get this sound that fits this universe in a way that the audience won't even notice?
Great. That's a great question. I would say don't be afraid of temp sound, right? You want to just get the thing, think of just having like working in an Unreal or Unity, and it's like I just have a generic avatar, but you know what? My world exists, like my avatar can run around. Same with sounds. Even if it's you just kind of like miming it with your mouth, just to be able to have some sounds, I'm always not afraid of temp sounds because at least gets it to the next step of saying, okay, let's make that sound better, right? It's not from no sound to the perfect sound. It's let's get something in there. In dialogue, that's what scratch audio is for. Let's get this conversation going. Does that dialogue even fit? Because on paper versus when you say it, it could have a different, intention. And so therefore you want to maybe hear the conversation, be like, oh, that doesn't make sense. Let's change it up before we get an actor to actually do it or whatnot. But I say definitely don't be afraid of temp. And then in terms of technical, if someone's ever, you know what, I can record a couple things myself or whatever. Something I always say is that I see a lot is that you can always make audio louder. When something is too loud and it distorts, it's recorded as distortion, and that's harder to clean up. But perfectionists, and audiophiles will say, well, the true use of the gear and you get the warmth of the preamp. It's like, no. If you're just recording something, you can record it quietly. You can always make it louder because I've seen too much audio that gets too crunchy and distorted. It's like, don't be afraid to record it a little quieter to be safer. So there's little things like that I think can help bridge that gap.
Interesting. Yeah, there's so as a designer, that's the main thing I do. I am largely a system designer, and I largely work on educational games, actually. As a designer, iteration and prototyping is like critical to what we do, is basically what we do. And it's interesting to think about, like, what does the prototyping process look like in the sound design world? I think temp sounds are a great example of exactly that. Like, it allows for essentially iteration. Maybe even before you have an audio person working on these sound effects, if you at least have like some BFXR 8-bit like sword stabby sound, at the very least that audio person has a framework of what you're imagining, and then perhaps that sound can go through a couple iterations from there. The prototype version is whatever the hell I found on the internet. The next version of it is the first pass from the audio person, and then the third version is like the polished up version of that sound effect.
Yes,
love it.
As a sound person, I love notes. So like when I give a sound, I don't expect or want someone to say, this is it, thank you. I'm like, no, tell me, what do you like? What do you not like? Let's work on it. This is not I didn't like craft this from the sacred sound fires and, forged it for you. It's like, no, tell me what's wrong with it. I want you to like it too. And I want to fit what's in your head, and let's tweak it. Let's change it. Let's get rid of it and make a new one. That's part of that process.
You know, George, the Fat Man Singer?
No, I do not.
You could maybe look him up. He's an old hat in the audio games world. He's considered one of the like OGs of video game audio. And we had him on the show a while back now. Maybe we should invite him back. Regardless though, I had the pleasure of working with him when I was working at Together Labs. And working with him was such a joy. We would, once per project, like it wasn't a lot of time. It was a pretty minimal amount of time investment. Once per project, we would just sit down and we'd go through every sound effect that we were asking for this project, and every music track that we were asking for this project. And all we would do for like 1 to 3 hours is he'd go, what about this? And we'd be like, you know, he would just play some crap, and I'd go like, yeah, that's about right. Or I'd go like, yeah, that feels a little too lighthearted, I think. And that was it. That 3 hours, though, I think got us so much closer to being on the same page about what this game was trying to communicate.
Oh, that's
And
awesome. I love
it
that.
was so much fun. Yeah. So I think maybe the lesson to pull out of that for everyone is, and I would say this applies to every contributor. This doesn't have to just be audio people. This is also artists. This is also like somebody who's making you, I don't know, cool shaders or something. Don't be scared to iterate with those people and to contribute with those people. Oftentimes, as Matt is suggesting, they like that. They want direction. They want to work with you. And also, even if you don't have the sort of technical language to be able to intelligently, I'm doing air quotes for the listeners who can't see me, intelligently communicate with them, even being able to say something like, I don't think this is quite crunchy enough, is still some direction for that person to be able to iterate upon and hopefully get closer to what everyone is imagining together. All right, now, you've made a cardinal mistake here, Matt.
Oh,
Which is that which is that you wanted to talk about two different subjects, which means now I need a second 101 on dialogue. What is the impact of great dialogue in games?
ooh. So, there's a bit that I always do that anytime a room turns dark and I turn on the light, the first thing I do is go, "You're finally awake," right? Because that line sticks with me. And it's like, no matter how cheesy a performance it is, it sticks with you. And the impact of good dialogue, I know working on with a number of the big voice actors of the community, you know, they talk about their favorite roles and the impact of those roles on them, and how those performances live with you, and the emotion translates when you're playing it, when you see the emotion put into the performance. And good dialogue can good acting, good dialogue, and good storytelling through the voice can convey something so much more than, because you have that human element, you have that emotional element that brings you attachment to that character, that story. You know, I think of like pre-voice acting, music would do that. Music would do that in the way that, like, I think of like Nobuo Uematsu, but the Final Fantasy music, and how that always, I listen to a certain track from Final Fantasy 9 and it just brings me right back to like where I was in my parents' basement in the 90s playing it, you know. But now with today's technology and game building and having dialogue, it just, I've had games that just draws me in because of the dialogue, and like I just want to listen to more. And when it's done well and effectively, that doesn't mean all the dialogue, that doesn't mean, you know, exposition beyond exposition, that just means that it's effectively applied, so that for that context of that game or that experience, you're just drawn in, and you want to live in that world more because of that dialogue, because of that story, because whether you're that character or you're interacting with another character, you know, I don't know, dialogue to me is such a, I can gush about it for hours and hours, but yeah, the impact of dialogue to me is forever lasting. Like you'll remember those bits, those lines, those things that affected you, you know, long after you've played the game.
Yeah, I love that. We one of my biggest like fanboy moments on this show, we had William Shen from Bethesda come on the show, and I didn't actually realize this, but like on the show, like live, I found out that he was the dude who wrote "Oh, You're Finally Awake" from Skyrim. I was pretty speechless for a hot second there. Yeah, I can completely agree with that. I think it's interesting living in an a budding AI world right now, where AI is sort of threatening to maybe take some stuff over, or at the very least, we're sort of figuring out how to plug it into our workflows. And writing is one of those very first fronts where people think it might like take over. But I hope anyway, and I think that the reality of that is fairly unlikely because of how potent a well-written line can be. Like an AI could spit out an approximation of what we've written in the past. But yeah, "Oh, you're finally awake." Like what a simple line that is, and yet not a single one of us will ever forget it. At least anyone who's played Skyrim during its height. Do you have, I guess, so similar to this top tip, the best sound design will go unnoticed. Do you have similar tips for writing or adding dialogue to your games?
I will say when you're recording dialogue, like when you get to the point that you have an actor and you're recording, you're in a studio, as me as an engineer, my biggest tip is always be rolling. Always be recording because you don't know what you're going to capture in the moment. You're sitting there with a director, with a writer, with an actor and maybe an engineer, or even it's just you, the writer and the director, and with the actor over like, a Discord or Zoom call. If you're always recording and you're just having that conversation and workshopping things, I can't tell you how many times you've had a conversation about a line or just a grunt or whatever. And then, do you mean like this? Ugh! You go, yes, that was it. Okay, now let's record and do that again. It's like, no, we just did it and we loved it. Why do we have to recreate it now? Because that magic was there. So that's something that technically I'm always preaching is that always be rolling. I'm hitting record before the director says, all right, ready, whatever, because you don't know what kind of magic you might get. But in terms of crafting dialogue for your game, something that I know, I wish it was. Dialogue voiceover isn't always meant for every game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So finding where to implement dialogue effectively is something to test. Is something definitely in a prototyping phase. Try it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, that's okay. Me as a dialogue person will not be hurt because if it makes the product better, it makes the experience better. But it's such a collaborative thing. It isn't someone writes it and hands down the tablets and then the actor speaks the tablets. It is a collaborative thing. I can tell you how many lines are kind of adjusting, created on the go, whether it's the engineer, the actor in the session. Just be like, what if we have a conversation like this? So that collaboration and flexibility is absolutely key to having good dialogue in your game.
I love that. Yeah, that's another one that applies to everything. I think especially, so I am a remote worker. I was a remote worker before the dark times, 2020. I've been a remote worker for a long time. There are good things about being a remote worker. There's reasons I continue to choose it. And there are bad things, for sure. There are weaknesses. And one of the big weaknesses is that it's really tempting to not collaborate. To not collaborate really like authentically. It's easy to be like, I don't want to get into a Zoom meeting, just send me a freaking email. But the reality is every aspect of game development is bettered for having collaboration. There's a reason that we like having diverse talent on our team. There's a reason that we like having diverse skill sets on our team. Because when you get to sit in a room and just say, what about this? And somebody goes, oh my God, that's perfect. That is so much more potent than just like sending a text description and getting back a sound file that you then plug in. So regardless
Absolutely.
regardless of whether it's dialogue or sound or literally any aspect of game dev, make sure you are making time to collaborate authentically and just hang out. I've spent a lot of time recently for the Foundry trying to figure out what makes for what steps we can take to guarantee an amazing game. And there are no steps like that. That's a falsehood. But the one thing that seems to be pretty consistent is that if you were having a great time making the game, it will almost always result in a better game. So make sure you're having a good time and hanging out with your friends, your fellow developers. All right, so here is my last question before we move into community questions. If you have questions for Matt, drop them in the chat, either on the streams, I'm watching the stream chats, or here in the Discord. We're going to move into those in just a second. Before then, for those who want to get started with sound composition or voiceover effects, dialogue, what are some of your go-to tips for getting started learning? And then maybe some of the go-to tools and skills that they should be practicing.
So I would say, you don't, if you want to learn to play guitar, you don't go to Guitar Center and look at the $10,001 one and go, I need that one, right? Because no matter how much money you have, you pick it up, it's still gonna go clang when you first strum it, right? So there's so many free tools, like whether from recording from creating, recording, and then even editing and implementation. There's so many tools that you can use along the way. So for example, there's an app on your phone. I always tell people if you need to record something on a whim, there's it's called the Dolby On app. It can record full PCM. What it means is that it's the full quality audio of your microphone WAV files on your phone, not just the phone memo app or whatever, right? If you were recording on your computer, Audacity is a great free recording tool. I can't tell you how many things in the industry recorded on Audacity because it's free and every actor isn't an audio engineer. So they're like, it worked fine for me. So we've been doing that for the past 5 years remotely and it's great. We're not going to change anything. if you have a Mac, GarageBand is great. And fun fact that if you ever heard of Logic Pro as a recording DAW, Logic's technically just the paid version of GarageBand. So if you needed something as like a gateway, right? Reaper, I know Reaper is huge in the industry for games because of its scripting ability. So Reaper is a great tool, and that is you can use it for free. You can pay for it to get more stuff out of it, but it's not even that expensive. But that's another free tool that don't. Regardless of the industry standards, don't be afraid to work from the ground up with that kind of those free, the free apps like that. What was the second part of the question?
No problem. Second part is like, what should they actively be doing? So one of the big ones, actually, I've been breaking away from this for the longest time. In fact, if you're a listener of this podcast, Matt, you know this. I'm always just like, make games, release games. But lately, I feel like I've been getting a little bit more pushback on that, and that practice projects that aren't necessarily a full complete game are good and kosher too. So what should they actively be doing? Should they be contributing to games? Should they be just making cool music? What should they do?
So with that mantra of just keep making games, in audio, just keep recording things, right? Because I primarily work in dialogue, but I still do sound design stuff, and I'll always record things. I have a little Zoom recorder that if I hear something cool, I'll just go record it. I was literally at the park with my wife, some friends of ours, and our kids. Our girls were playing, and this one thing that kids swing on was so squeaky. And it sounded so industrial and cool. So everyone's like, hey, we're going to go. See you later. I go, honey, go in the car. I'll be there in a minute. And literally had my phone up to it trying to record the squeak of this gear. Because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but it sounds really cool. And now I have that recording and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it was really cool. And if I ever need a weird squeaky gear industrial sound, I was like, wait a second. Let me listen to that thing I recorded at the park months ago because... and just keep your ears open for cool sounds because you might experience things that you will have a hard time recreating. And it's like, now I have that in my back pocket. And if I want to use it, I can. So I love that element of sound and sound design.
That's awesome. One of my biggest side hobbies is Warhammer 40K and just model building in general, kit bashing. So you've got the audio equivalent of my bits bin with a million random pieces of plastic that I found places and just thought looked cool.
I love that. I had that as a kid with Lego heads, right? He's like, I don't know which Lego character I'm going to put this on, but I have a cool sword in this cool head. I'll find a character to put it on later.
Yeah. I'm sure not going to let it go. I'm not going to let it disappear. This will be here forever. All right. I think that means it is time for...
Question of the day.
Wow, welcome to Season 3 where we have sound effects. It is time for the question of the day, which is where we reiterate one of the most important points we learned from Matt and earn some House Cup points. So I'm going to ask a very simple question. The first person to type the correct answer in the chat gets some House Cup points while we switch over to the community questions. Here is the question. It's a pretty easy one. You probably already know what I'm going to ask. What is the one 101 tip that Matt gave us for good sound design in games? I'm also going to call up Major Bacon to move into our community questions. The sound should indeed go unnoticed. Major Bacon actually nailed it. Bacon, which house would you like to give your House Cup points to?
The Rogue one, I think.
All right, +3 for Rogue. Well done. Indeed, the best sound design goes unnoticed. It fits the world so perfectly you don't even think about it until later when you go, man, Darth Vader sounds so dope. All right, Major Bacon, you've got the first community question for Matt. Would you like to ask it?
Sure. Yeah, by the way, very impressive list of stuff you've done, man. I can't wait to hear more stuff that you'll be working on later on. So the question is more about prioritizing audio tracks and sounds when it comes to working on a project. So I phrased it in this manner, how would you prioritize which audio tracks and sounds happen first, and on what level of quality being good enough would satisfy you or the people you're making the tracks for? It's various. It's either a film or a game or a audio drama for Spotify or something like that. Just anything in general.
Well, in terms of structuring tracks in more of an organizational way, no matter what it is, as long as you know how it's organized, just organize it. I'm a big color coding guy, whether I'm doing a film mix or organizing assets, I love using the tags in Mac OS with the different colors and everything, or my tracks are crazy colors and things like that. Because I'm a big visual. It's funny, as an audio guy, I'm a very visual person. So just keeping it organized so you can easily. I think if you shared your workflow with some random person who has nothing about games, nothing about audio, has never used a computer, they can go, "Oh, these colors are grouped like this. These must be this that sound and that sounds." In terms of like building a world, let's say, um, I've been literally just playing a little bit of Minecraft last week, and I was thinking about how like minimal the atmosphere and the sound design is, and like I think in film, if you see something move, you expect to hear a sound, right? So the same thing in games, I can see even as like a starting point to give life to the world. If you are a character walking around, do you want to hear the trees that you may interact with, twice in that level, or do you want to hear your character moving even with like little basic footsteps? And so, even without music, without atmosphere, without enemy banter or whatever, you still start to feel the world come alive, and then you can feel what comes naturally next in that evolution. But if you see it moving, or the thing that moves the most, try starting with that as a basis of building the soundscape of that world.
Wait, so you're mentioning like have it start at after a couple of other things have kind of started, is what you're saying? Like the example you gave is kind of like walking by, it's a character walking by, which means like a certain prototype needs to be created in order to be in that atmosphere in a sense. Is that like what you mean?
Yeah, you want to build the vibe, right? You want to build the vibe of that game, and um, you know, some of those core sounds, like in a Minecraft sense, the footsteps are so paramount to that, and you just want to feel. You want to feel that you are Steve, right? in Minecraft, but you know, uh, um, and you do that with footsteps, not breathing, not dialogue systems or anything like that, but just some basic crunching, right? And it's kind of funny. They put some sound effects in that game, and then they stopped, and that's what that game is. So it's like you're building this world, and so you put in what you feel is the initial life of that world, and then you just keep layering on top of that until you feel it's either too much and take it back, or be like, I need to keep adding more. I'm happy with this. This is the world that I'm immersed in, and I'm enjoying the soundscape I've created. But having those fundamental, this is the most interaction that's going on. Let me apply sounds to those moments. I feel at least will help bring that life that wasn't there before, and then you can take it from there and see what you want to do next. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, yeah, I kind of get it. Just making it more believable, just in order to start it off, has those layering effects. I get it now. Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you, Major Bacon. Yeah, if correct me if I'm wrong, I think sound design, as with many other aspects of the game, like it's also something you're going to kind of collaborate on and may be a little different every time. You're always going to need footfall sound effects, but maybe in this one particular game, like it's more important that I don't know, the power ups that you pick up have like a really satisfying crunchy sound, and so you agreed that that's the P1 and that the footfall can wait for a little bit longer or something.
Oh yeah, like certain shooting games, I biggest criticism that I've seen is like how chunky do the weapons feel? Is it
Hmm.
or is it how
Yeah.
does if you load a shotgun in a shooting game and it has this crunch that just goes, oh, I can't wait to
Yeah.
shoot demons with this thing or whatever, versus like a little like toy gun, it's
Yeah.
that can make all the difference. You don't need footsteps because you got these chunky guns that you just can't wait to use in the game.
Yes. Have you seen? There's a super old YouTube video about juiciness in games where it's like Brick Breaker. Have you ever seen that?
I've watched clips of it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If anyone here, somebody actually in the chat, go and find the video for us. It is some talk about adding juice. There's two dudes on stage, and they're just showing you how to make Brick Breaker go from just being Brick Breaker to being like amazing. And all they actually do is add a bunch of visual and audio juice. And it's really true. Like, imagine a shooting game where the character just pulls out a gun and it's kind of static. And it doesn't make any sound. And then imagine one where like the animation is them like hefting the gun out and it like falls into place and the sound effect is like like that. Ooh, so much better. All right. Second question is from Amani. She would like to know, what can programmers do to make your job easier when collaborating with you?
Um, whether it's dialogue, whether it's sound design, whether it's music, anything like that, I think having let's take music. Temp music is huge, and I'm saying like I can't tell you how many times clips of a YouTube or like, hey, I love the Tenet soundtrack, and so that was the vibe of this. References are huge. If I want things to sound like this game, I want the footsteps of this game, but I want the spells of this game, and I want the music of that movie. Like the references are huge because otherwise, as a sound person, you're kind of just guessing. Even with voice prints, how many times have you seen, this big bull character, this big giant beast, and he goes, "Hey, how's it going?" Right? You don't know that because as a sound person, you're like, "Oh, we have to cast and find this big burly guy to do it." It's like, no, but you don't want that. You want this, the bit. The joke is the opposite. So having references, having and temp is great because you're not taking the power away from a sound person to create that. You're just giving them a head start, saying we're in a forest with no paths. Can you at least go northeast, please? And that really helps audio people be able to at least start those first steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's I think for a while I believed that, and this was probably coming from me and what I wanted as a junior developer. For a while, I think I believed that I wanted to give like maximum autonomy to whoever I was collaborating with. So let's say, the audio person. I was like, oh, I shouldn't be telling the audio person what to do. Like that's their job and they want to do that and they're not going to like it if I tell them what to do. And there's certainly a line that can be crossed there, where you're a helicopter parent equivalent of a developer to your audio person. But like for the most part, people do want direction. Think about like a game jam, for instance. It's so satisfying to be given a box to design inside of, to be given like a theme or some other direction to come up with a game concept inside of. And that often actually leads to more interesting, exciting interpretations of the problem. So when you're collaborating with somebody, like don't be scared to give them the direction and to collaborate with them on that direction, because oftentimes that leads to better designs anyway.
Oh, absolutely. I had an old professor when I was in my undergrad, 20 years ago. Oh my God, 20 years ago. When I was in my undergrad, and I had the dean of the school at the time, it was a state school in New York, and he walked in with like the rubber overalls like that you go fly fishing with. And he walked in with his hat, and he didn't say anything in the class, and he gave his whole speech about throwing mud on the wall and seeing what sticks. And I thought it was so crazy what he was saying at the time, but like now I think back and I go, I literally do that I think about throwing mud in the wall and seeing what sticks. Nothing sticks, keep slinging mud, see what happens, right? And it's funny how that metaphor just stuck with me because you don't know what's going to stick. Hey, I didn't know that was stuck in the mud. Whoa, let's do with that. You don't know until you try.
Mm-hmm. And some of the best designs I feel like are actually mistakes or temp solutions. Like some of the time it's terrible, but other times like you'll just be like, man, I don't know, I'll just slap this in, and then as it sits there as a temp asset, you're like, I actually think I really like that, and eventually, maybe it gets iterated a little bit more, but turns into something more permanent. All right, This is a similar question, but perhaps gets a little bit more to the answer. Eldritch Pros would like to know, as a developer that doesn't specialize in audio, is there anything I should be aware of when implementing audio, such as what if I use pre-made audio I purchase in packs? So I think this is for like the dev who doesn't have an audio support person, maybe.
Gotcha. QC, quality control is key. You implement all the sounds and just play it. And just listen and take notes. This sounds too loud. This sounds too quick, because that massaging, is so important. Because no matter what planning and what levels you set it, and the perfect reverb and the perfect effects, and until you play it, and then all of a sudden you open it, it's quiet. You open a door, and it goes, oh my God! Oh, let's turn that way down, right? So that's the kind of thing we're just living in the world after you put even stock sounds in. Live in it and just, massage it. That massaging is very important to do, because otherwise, again, that best sound design goes unnoticed. It's like you notice it, whether it's missing or whether it's too prominent. And that tweaking phase, having worked freelanced on the mocap stage at Sony, and I've talked to the dialogue designers over there, and they have literal passes of those big titles where they'll just play the games for hours and days and weeks, and have like a mixing day where they'll just go down and just watch people play the game and then just tweak it, because this dialogue effort is maybe 2 dB too loud, or this breath is 2 dB too quiet. Like literally doing that just to even things out, regardless of where the source of that audio came from.
Yeah, that's okay. So QC, for anyone who may not be aware, is quality control, sometimes called QA, quality assurance, kind of two different things, sort of. This is another tip for everybody, and this is kind of, I'm taking it a slightly different direction than what you're talking about. What you're talking about is more or less polished, like let's experience it and live with it a little bit and tweak it a little bit. But this is just a tip for everybody that drives me a little crazy when I'm working with juniors. And everybody here knows that I love my juniors, but please actually QA your work every single time. I don't know how many times I've had assets delivered or, some new system implemented or whatever that clearly didn't actually have the person who contributed it take a second to play it and make sure it functions. This is just a PSA to all the juniors out there. You will look so much more professional and competent if you take 30 freaking seconds to play your contributions before sending it off to people. That is all.
I would say in an audio sense too, even if you just I know I work mostly on Mac, you just hit spacebar to preview file and just go down, just listen to them. Even before implementation, even before playing it, just listen to each audio file. Does it start and stop at the right time? Does it all sound the right volume? Does it, is it in the right folder or the right, just literally that kind of just double checking, because you'll be surprised, like, oh, I didn't know that was there.
Yeah. Definition of done is something we talk about a lot with our teams that we put together for our various programs. Definition of done is very important. Done does not mean I have finished the asset and it's existing in a repo somewhere. Done means it's in the game functionally. Like I can actually play it. If you tell me that your project is done, but what that actually means is, Willem, I need you to go plug it in now, it's not done. You are incorrect. So yes, take a little time to make sure it is actually there. And the definition of done may be different in different projects, but make sure you establish that and then you actually do it. All right, we've got Fuwa on stage with one more question. What you got for us, Fuwa?
Hey, properly.
Hello. Yes, we can.
Give me a moment.
Yep.
Oh, that's great. I wasn't sure if you can hear me. Sorry for the background noise. Literally had it on. So thanks so much for being able to join the podcast first, because I was worried about audio implementation for a lot of time. So as I said already in the comments, I'm a games art student in my final year, and I'm just graduating this year. And my husband graduated 2 years ago as a games dev. So basically, we are looking to start pilot. Sorry, little one. So basically, we are looking to do our own startup. Starting it around the summer period when I graduate. And I was wondering what I am capable of. How can I get information on how to include audio and soundtracks and sound effects and everything like that? What am I capable of doing on my own until we are able to afford actually to work with a sound engineer? It would be absolutely amazing, but there's no way, unfortunately, that I can afford it right now to collaborate anyone else apart from the three of us.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's any resources whatsoever, I can be pointed to, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely, yeah. So you are a little fuzzy, a little hard to hear, but just to make sure, Matt, the question is basically, no problem. So Fuwa is a games artist that is just graduating. They're trying to release some of their first games. They don't have money to pay any audio folks. What are some tips, tricks you can give basically to get audio into the games and to learn more about using audio and dialogue?
So something that's relatively new is the BBC. The BBC released one of their old sound effect libraries are free to use and free license to use. So especially if you want to use temp, if you just Google BBC sound effects, there's an entire sound effects library, has 13,000 sound effects or something like that you can use, or 33,000, some crazy number, which is part of a bigger library. And you can just download them as different, you can just search, check the metadata, and use that as a start to being able to get sounds. If you say, well, I want to put music on it, but I can't afford a composer and I don't know how to do it, you can do things like you can get stuff on Pond 5 and things like that for a few bucks, just to be able to say, okay, let me, even as temp, or even as I want to pay for something, but I can't afford a full orchestra. You can use stuff like that to buy things on a budget. Is absolutely, a possibility for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
Absolutely. And the other thing I would recommend there, this is something we're doing more and more in our community, actually. Given the state of the industry for juniors, it's really hard for juniors to get professional work on their portfolios, and that's true for everybody, including sound people. So this is really, you'll only get help from the most junior folks. And really, I almost always recommend, if you are capable, to just pay people. It's so much cleaner and everyone appreciates it. But if you truly don't have the money, or if it's truly like you're working with some buddies kind of thing, revenue share is perfectly valid as long as everybody agrees to it and feels good about it. So you could maybe have a composer come and learn on your project for 10% of the game revenue or whatever the hell it might be. All right, we've got one more question for the day from Just Simi. One of the major things I teach my students is the importance of sound. What advice would you give them as well? Is voiceover important when limited on time?
The importance of good sound. So I will say, to answer the second part of the question, is about voiceover important when limited on time. Time is the key. I work in sometimes very tight turnarounds, and you have to make those decisions at what honors the experience best. And as much as you might want to put dialogue in this experience, can you do a better job with putting in less, as opposed to just throwing more things in and calling it done? So like I always tell my students that focus on making the things that you are putting in polished and sound great. If you don't quite have the sweeteners or don't have the dialogue that you want it to have, that's okay, because you have the things that are in there are golden and are great. Because sometimes you're up against a tight deadline and you can never fit 1,000 things in one moment. And so definitely just polish what you have and do the best with what you have. I've had students tell me about projects where I have this many minutes and I have to do this, and this, and I go, just create the atmosphere, make it believable. There's big, explosion, do the explosion, but don't do every clothing movement and every footstep. Don't worry about that. Just make the sounds that you put in, make them sound great. And that will be believable more than putting in things that maybe didn't work in the end, right? So I would say that would be how I would approach the limited time. In terms of the importance of sound, that is a question I can spend a lot of time talking about, but what I will say is that it's very important. Yes. How do I put this? Is that I think a summation of everything we've been talking about the good sound design going unnoticed, but trying things out, making sure when you QA it or QC it that, it's in and out. Listening to a file, it's not jarring and it's not jumping at you. I've listened to too many things that it's like, oh, did anybody mix this? And it's like sound designed by 10 people. It's like, okay. But even a little bit of sound can go a long way, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you have to have, not every game is meant to have dialogue and full score and this and that, but some sound probably, unless that's the style of the game, is a silent film sound game. Yeah. But finding even the minimal just to bring the world to life can do a lot.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that one more. I think I would, I like pulling out lessons for all disciplines. So this is the same for basically any asset type. Like even as a game designer, like mechanically, it's the same for mechanics. Every single new mechanic or system you introduce to a game is a greater cost. And it also means that every system and mechanic is going to naturally get less polish. And so in general, you want to keep it simple. You want to have just a couple, and you want those to be spicy. You want them to be good. And that's true for sound. That's true for visuals. That's true for everything. Think about your super hots of the world. Like the actual art in that game is simple. There is one enemy type as far as actual models, and then there is the player, and all you see are some hands, and then there's a bunch of white boxes. And yet that's one of the most visually striking games of the past 10 years, despite the fact that technical implementation was actually pretty low for art. And there are plenty of games, too, where dialogue specifically doesn't even fit. Think about your Legends of Zeldas. If Link was like, let me give you a diatribe about how I have to go save Zelda, like, you probably wouldn't relate to him as much. Instead, the silent protagonist actually means something to you.
We love a silent protagonist, yes.
We do. Because then we can be the special people. Anyway, all right. We are at the end of the episode. Before we say goodbye, we like to do two things here, Matt. And the first one is we like to assign homework. So what is something that the audience could do in the next week? It'll take them about an hour to practice some of what we talked about here today.
I'd say the two things I would suggest is, one, try finding 5 cool sounds and record them. on your phone, wherever you can make it mouth noises. Find 5 cool sounds and record them, and now you have 5 sounds that no one else has, right? And then the second thing is, you don't know when you're going to use them, just like those Warhammer pieces, right? And then the second thing I would say is if you are looking to implement sound or dialogue in your game, when we're talking about references and comps and things like that, think of 5 games that have really good sound and why you think it has good sound, and 5 games that have bad sound and why you think it's bad. Because that's very subjective. It's not, this is not X game is bad. It's like, well, to you it's bad, to me it's genius. But if you can identify what you think is good and bad, then that just helps give you a direction for how you would do it yourself in the next time.
Love that. Awesome. So I, as always, I love to force people to do this and to post about this. So your homework is to record 5 sound effects, which is awesome. Maybe drop them in like a Google Drive somewhere so that you can link your sound effects for us so we can go and see what you recorded, because that would be fun. And then I think this is a really important one. This is a lot of the, understanding the world. There's a like experience approach that we recommend here, which is the T-shaped experience approach, which basically means I know at least an entry-level amount of information about basically every discipline. And then I'm specialized in one. So even though I am a game designer, I of course have some sense of an understanding of sound, what makes good sound. I of course have some understanding of what makes good visuals and how that even works, how it technically, functionally works. So this is a great exercise, even if you aren't a sound person, because you'll get some sense of understanding of how the sound world works. So write up 5 games you think have good sound and why, and 5 games that you think have bad sound and why. Be brave for us and post this to LinkedIn. You can tag myself, Willem Delventhal, the Indie Game Academy, and then Matthew Kulewicz. The spelling will be down below. And we'll all get excited for you. And then if you're feeling a little too insecure to post it online, you can also always bring it to our Discord, where there are links to join down below. All right, that is your homework. Record 5 sounds, and then write up a report on 10 games with 5 with good and 5 with bad. All right, before we say goodbye, Matt, are there any last words of wisdom or anything you would like to plug here at the end of the episode?
I think so. I would say the community of game audio, the community of dialogue especially, is a lot smaller than you think. And the more you live in it, the more you'll find people that your degrees of Kevin Bacon get smaller and smaller. And that happens to me every day. And so your good work will behest good work. And people will recognize it even if you don't, or you don't think someone does. You'll be surprised when going, I know you did that. That was great. So good work always behests good work, and the community is smaller than you think. So, compassionate and treat each other well, and you'll find more friends than you think.
That is true. I love that. That is always true for the entire game industry. We're a little baby industry. There's only like 300,000-ish of us, like across all disciplines, across the whole planet. That is not many people. So don't be a jerk and be good to each other, please. Let's use this industry as an example of how to be good to each other. I think we need that. All right, it is time for us to say goodbye. This has been a fantastic episode. I've had a lot of fun with you here, Matt. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Absolutely. And thank you for those who asked questions. If you have any further questions, you can always jump into the Discord and ask them. And as always, we'll be back here every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Join us for the next one. Ask your own questions live. And if you enjoyed, we ask that you send this episode along to just one other person who may enjoy it too. All right, that's going to be it. Goodbye, everybody.
Game over.
All right, goodbye, all.